The supply and demand model is one of the most powerful tools in economics. It is useful in making business and policy decisions. We will use it to predict the effects of various events on market price and quantity. We can use it to explain why there is unemployment, why there are more people that need a kidney than there are willing donors, the effects of U.S. ethanol policy on the price of wheat in Kenya, or the effects of improvements in fracking in North Dakota on the demand for lithium-ion pure electric car batteries. Let's first explore the supply curve. The supply curve illustrates the law of supply. The law of supply states that there is a direct relationship between price and quantity supplied. That is, as the price increases, quantity supplied increases. Or when price decreases, quantity supplied decreases. This positive relationship is illustrated by an upward sloping supply curve. The price on the vertical axis is the price that consumers pay and the supplier receives. The supply curve illustrates a set of supply plans. It shows that at various prices, how much suppliers in the market plan to supply. When the price changes, we call this a change in quantity supplied, not a change in supply. A change in supply denotes a shift in the supply curve. This is not caused by the price of the good that the supply curve is for. The whole point of the supply curve is to show how price and quantity are related. If the price that is denoted on the vertical axis changes, the supply curve shows how quantity changes. If a change in the price causes the curve to shift, then it would be impossible to read the graph. The law of supply flows from the definition of economics. Economics is the study of how individuals make themselves as well off as possible in a world of scarcity, and the consequences of those individual decisions for markets and the entire economy. A key word in the definition is scarcity. Scarcity implies that we face trade-offs and must make choices. For instance, the scarcity of time implies that you can't be watching this video at the same time that you are driving, rock climbing, surfing, or taking a nap. In fact, if you're watching this video, you're nowhere close to falling asleep. Scarcity implies that you have to make a choice. Every time you make a choice, you incur an opportunity cost. So if you're watching this video, and out of all the things you could be doing with your time, the next best thing to watching this video is rock climbing, then the opportunity cost of watching this video is the value you place on rock climbing. That is what you gave up to watch this video. Scarcity implies opportunity cost. It is because there is scarcity, or in other words, it is because we face trade-offs, that there is cost in the world. These oil cost data published in the Wall Street Journal help illustrate what the supply curve has to do with the law of increasing opportunity cost. The table shows the average cost to producing a barrel of oil in 2016. In Iran and Saudi Arabia, that average cost of producing a barrel of oil is less than $10. This implies that Iran and Saudi Arabia can profitably produce oil if the world price of oil is $10 a barrel. In the United Kingdom, the average cost of producing a barrel of oil is close to $45. At a price of $10 a barrel, a company in the UK likely cannot produce any oil profitably. The key difference between oil production in Saudi Arabia and the United Kingdom is opportunity cost. In both Saudi Arabia and the United Kingdom, the labor and capital, that is, the tools and machinery, used to produce oil is scarce. Both countries face trade-offs in how they employ their labor and capital. If more labor is used in oil production, the scarce labor cannot be used to produce steel, automobiles, or software. Same for capital. Suppose that in both countries the choice is simply between using labor and capital for oil production or steel production. If it costs $10 to produce a barrel of oil in Saudi Arabia, this suggests that $10 of steel was given up by allocating the scarce labor and capital away from steel into oil. In the United Kingdom, close to $45 of steel is given up to have the scarce labor and capital used to produce oil. The difference in opportunity cost between the two countries might be because the oil is closer to the surface in Saudi Arabia. It takes less labor and capital in Saudi Arabia to extract a barrel of oil. So Saudi Arabia gives up less steel for a barrel of oil than the UK. In a complex real-world economy, it's not likely simply a trade-off between oil production and steel production. However, the reality is that in both countries, to produce more oil, less of other goods and services must be produced because the factors of production like labor and capital are scarce. You can see this in the table that as the world price of oil increases, it becomes profitable for more and more countries to produce oil. So, As price increases, the quantity supplied of oil increases. That is the law of supply. Let's work a problem that deals with opportunity costs. Suppose that you get excited about getting into rock climbing and spend $200 on new gear. However, after a weekend of trying out your new sport, you decide it just isn't for you. Turns out gear shops don't take used climbing gear back. In fact, it is hard to sell used gear too. A rock climber doesn't want to have to wonder what the previous owner used the rope for when she is 500 feet off the deck. So you decide to sell your used climbing gear online to whoever is willing to give you the best offer. If it cost you $20 to ship the gear to someone, what is the least you would accept for the gear? Of course, you're going to take the highest bid you can get. So given that you are taking the highest bid, what is the least you would accept for the gear? The correct answer is A, $20, because the $200 is sunk. By sunk, we mean a cost that is no longer recoverable. Since the $200 is sunk, it is no longer part of the opportunity cost. If you are no longer going to use the gear, the actual opportunity cost of selling the gear is simply the cost of selling it, $20. Given that the gear is now worthless to you and you cannot return it, if the best price you could get for the gear was $100, would you take it? Yes, because you would net $80. How about a price of $50? $30 profit is better than nothing. How about a price of $25 or $21? In each of these instances, you are making a profit. $20 is the absolute lowest you would go. This table contains what we call a demand schedule. This is a hypothetical demand schedule for hotel rooms in West Palm Beach. The price is the average price for a room with 2 queen beds, and the quantity is the number of hotel rooms with 2 queen beds demanded. The demand schedule illustrates the law of demand. The law of demand states that there is an inverse relationship between the price and the quantity demanded. If we graph the points on the demand schedule, we have a demand curve. We will draw a point for each price and quantity combinations in the demand schedule. So, when consumers pay $50 a night, consumers plan to buy 1,250 rooms. When the price is $100, consumers plan to buy 1,000 rooms. When the price is $150, consumers want to buy 750 rooms. So forth and so on until we get to a price of $300, where consumers now plan to buy 0 rooms. If we draw a line through the points, we get the demand curve. This too illustrates the law of demand. The demand curve and the demand schedule show consumers' buying plans. They show the number of hotel rooms consumers plan to purchase at any given price. When there is a change in the price of the good, this causes a change in quantity demanded. We show this as a movement along the curve. We don't call this a change in demand because a change in demand is a shift in the curve. This will never be caused by a change in the price of the good. We will look at the things that shift the demand curve and the supply curve in another video. We call the things that change supply or that change demand the determinants of supply or the determinants of demand. Let's now consider the supply schedule for hotels in West Palm Beach. If you graph the supply schedule, you have the supply curve. Let's pause for a quick problem. There is a price where quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. We call this equilibrium price. This is where buyers want to buy as much as suppliers want to supply. For this supply schedule and demand schedule, what is the equilibrium price? The answer is 100. At a price of 100, consumers want to purchase 1,000 hotel rooms and producers want to supply 1,000 hotel rooms. That is, quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. How is it that the market gets to equilibrium? Here you can see that if the market price was $50, then consumers would want to buy 1,250 rooms, but suppliers would only want to supply 950. There would be a shortage of 300 rooms. When there's a shortage, the consumers unable to get a room will bid the price of hotels up. They will offer to pay more than $50 a room in an attempt to get a room. As the price increases, quantity demanded decreases and quantity supplied increases. At a price of 100, quantity demanded decreases to 1,000 and quantity supplied increases to 1,000. So at a price of 100, suppliers want to supply as much as consumers want to buy. At a price of 100, the market is in equilibrium. That is, quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. Now let's suppose that the price of hotel rooms was $250. At this price, quantity demanded is only 250 rooms, while quantity supplied is 1,250 rooms. Here, there is a surplus of 1,000 rooms. Suppliers plan to supply 1,000 more rooms than consumers plan to buy. To find occupants for the surplus rooms, suppliers will begin offering consumers lower rates. As the price goes down, quantity demanded will increase, while quantity supplied will decrease. The price decrease will continue as long as there is a surplus of rooms. Once the price hits 100, then the market will be in equilibrium. Once again, consumers will want to purchase as many rooms as suppliers want to supply. The price of $100 is the equilibrium price because at that price, quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. Graphically, the equilibrium price and quantity is where the supply and demand curves intersect. We can take the principles we have learned and apply them to demand and supply equations. Suppose that the price for pepperoni pizza in Tucson is Q equals 135 minus 5P, and the supply is Q equals 10 times P, where Q is the quantity in thousands of pizzas and P is the price. What is the equilibrium price and quantity? To solve this, just remember at equilibrium price, quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. You can set quantity supplied equal to quantity demanded by setting these two equations equal to each other, then solve for P. Go ahead and give it a try. All right, let's go ahead and work through this problem. So we have that the demand equation is given by Q equals 135 minus 5P, and this is quantity demanded. And so quantity supplied is given by 10P. And we're looking for the equilibrium price. That's the price where buyers want to buy as much as suppliers want to supply. Or in other words, where quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. And so that's where 10P equals 135 minus 5P. Or where 15P equals 135. Or in other words, where P equals 9. So we can take this price and we can plug it into this supply equation, or you can plug it into the demand equation to get quantity, because this is the price where quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. Or in other words, both of these quantities should be the same quantity if we've solved this correctly. So that's a check that you can do. You can actually plug it into both and make sure you get the same quantity. Here you can see that it's going to be easiest if we plug it into the supply equation. And so here we get a quantity of 90. So we get a price of 9 and a quantity of 90. So that implies that C is the correct answer. Let's go ahead and give another problem a try. This is once again the same problem, but let's assume that the price is $6. What is quantity supplied? What is quantity demanded? We can calculate the quantity supplied and quantity demanded by plugging the price into supply and demand equations. Go ahead and give this problem a try. All right, so let's go ahead and solve this problem. Here we have a price of $6. This price is below the equilibrium price of 9. Our quantity demanded is going to be 135 minus 5P. So just plugging that price of $6 in, we get a quantity of 105. We can use the supply equation to find out quantity supplied. So plugging that price in, price of $6, we get a quantity supplied of 60. So when quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied, that implies that we have a shortage. And specifically, that shortage is equal to quantity demanded minus quantity supplied. So that will be 105 minus 60. Or in other words, we have a shortage of 45. Correct answer is going to be B. Let's go ahead and solve another problem. Once again, we have the same demand equation and the same supply equation, except for now, price is $15. Once again, what is quantity supplied? What's quantity demanded going to be? And then solve the problem. All right, let's go ahead and solve this problem. Now we have a price equal to $15. And so working with the demand equation to get quantity demanded, we plug in this price of 15 and we get a quantity demanded of 60. We can use the supply equation to find quantity supplied, plugging in our price of 15. We get quantity supplied of 150. So now our quantity supplied exceeds quantity demanded. That means suppliers want to supply more than buyers want to buy. And that gives us a surplus. And that surplus is going to be equal to quantity supplied minus quantity demanded. So that'll be 150 minus 60. So that will be 90. We got a surplus of 90. So A is the correct answer.